You're hereby notified that a workshop meeting for the Palatka City Commission is called to be held on Thursday, July 9th, 2015 at its regular meeting place of the Palatka City Commission, Palatka City Hall, 201 North 2nd Street, Palatka, Florida, to commence at 3 p.m. The purpose of the meeting, workshop meeting, is to discuss the proposed fiscal year 2015-2016 budget, first budget workshop. And we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We're going to ask Matt Reynolds, would he lead us in the invocation and pledge the flag?
Everybody, please bow your head. Dear Lord, we come to you this afternoon and we just ask you for guidance as we prepare to discuss the upcoming budget for the city. Please lead us and guide us in making the best decisions for the city as a whole. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Hill.
Here.
Vice Mayor Brown. Here. Commissioner Gorham.
Present.
Commissioner Campbell.
Present.
And it should be noted that Commissioner Norwood is absent and is out on GP business.
Thank you. Since we don't have an agenda for the workshop, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Reynolds.
All right, Matt Reynolds, Finance Director. Kind of wanted to start off the budget season this year, beginning with enterprise funds. Due to Mr. Suggs just starting last Thursday, I really wanted to give him a chance to be involved in the budget process. So today we're just going to go through the enterprise funds, and I've got a short preview of what was requested from the different departments in the general fund, and to kind of show what the operational balance of the general fund is so far requested. As I said, Mr. Suggs and I haven't had a chance to go through the entire general fund budget yet, so we're going to be doing another presentation on that one at the 23rd, and hopefully we can incorporate any input we get today on the enterprise funds in as well, and do a more complete presentation on the 23rd. So if it's fine, I'm going to step out here so I can see the screen. Everybody should have a printed copy of the presentation. I figured it may be a little bit easier to read if you have a printed copy in front of you, but I've also got it on the screen up here. So today's Thursday, July 9th, first budget workshop for fiscal year 2015-2016. And some citywide assumptions that I've got into the budget so far. Right now, I don't have any cost of living increase included in the budget. It's still kind of early in the budget process. That's typically how I've done it with city managers in the past is we'll take all of the department heads' requests, go through their requests, make adjustments as needed, present that information. And for example, last year we came back to the commission in one of the final budget workshops and showed what a cost of living increase would do at different levels on the reserves of each of those funds. So I included a 5% increase in health insurance costs. Our medical loss ratio, the last time I saw it several months ago, we're doing very well this year. However, with further things being implemented under ACA and talking with our health insurance agent, he still thinks that there may be a small increase. So I went ahead and included 5%. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask you, your insurance rates were really high because we had somebody who had a child that needed special care. Mm-hmm. Is that person still needing that care, or?
Well, due to HIPAA, I don't know, we don't know who it is, but we can look at what I was mentioning earlier, our medical loss ratio reports, and it shows the different categories that the claims are in. And there was one category for pharmacy that our claims went up by about $30,000 to $40,000 a month, and that started back in 2012. Looking at our most recent medical loss ratio, it's gone from being every month to being every 2 to 3 months now. So that's really helped our the amount that the insurance company has paid on our behalf to be a lot lower than what our premiums are, which is good for renewals. So it looks like that has slowed down a little bit, but every few months we still see that charge on there. So.
Are we gonna look for somewhere else to get health insurance if the cost is not going down? We've been with them a long time, and the agent has a lot of other businesses in town that he insures. He ought to be able to put some pressure on those companies to come down, and if you don't ask, you won't get.
We do that every year. We ask if any of the other insurance carriers are willing to give us a quote on it. In the past, because of that claim, that one type of claim, it's a hemophiliac claim. According to our agent, that is the worst claim to have because it can be ongoing for an entire lifetime. So. That's kind of why he said in the past we've had difficulty getting quotes from anybody else, and why we've kind of been at the mercy of Blue Cross and Blue Shield. So we'll try again this year. I don't know if how it's going to work out. So just hopeful that we won't see another 35–40% increase like we did a couple of years ago. So all things considered, what I'm seeing so far, I don't think that's going to happen. Another thing that we built into the budget is the pension contribution rates that the city has to contribute on behalf of each employee that's a member of the pension. And you can see that rates decreased slightly for general employees, decreased quite a bit for police officers, and remain the same for firefighters. This is good news for us after 4 or 5 years of steadily increasing pension costs. So that's a very good sign. The first fund we'll go over today is the airport fund. And some
question
Sure.
on that. Why did it decrease for the general employees and the police officers and remain the same for the firefighters?
There's a lot of different variables that go into the actuary's calculation. It's based on the current employees that are members of the plan, when they're going to retire, if anybody entered the drop, if anybody entered retirement, if any retirees passed away. There's a host of different reasons that one may decrease and another may not, or increase. And so it's kind of hard to say, and I don't know a specific reason why those did. Our actuary would probably be the better person to answer a question like that, because they would know specifically why it did that. But in the airport fund, we're estimating the majority of the revenues, which are really just fuel sales, 100 low lead and Jet A fuel sales, to remain roughly the same. However, hangar rental revenue, we're estimating to go up by approximately $50,000. We may back that number down a little bit. In talking with John earlier, he estimated that all of the new hangars that are currently being constructed and should be done by September 30th, the end of this fiscal year, if all of those hangars are rented, it'll be about $51,000 a year in revenue. However, turnover and some gaps and openings in hangar rentals, so we may back that figure down just a little bit. On the expenditure side, no major changes to personnel or operating expenses. Airport kind of runs the same year in and year out. There's really not much that we can change out there. We've looked at trying to adjust profit margins on fuel in the past, And for the couple of months when we did do that, and we weren't trying to be the lowest fuel in the region, fuel sales almost stopped. So, other than that, no capital improvements are included in next year's budget, and that's a first for me since I've been finance director. There's always been some sort of grant projects or something going on out there. All three projects we've got going right now are estimated to be completed by the end of this fiscal year. The T-hangers, North Apron expansion, and the South Airport drainage project. So this sheet, I kind of tried to break up the airport fund revenues and expenditures into easier to understand sections instead of looking at a sheet for all of the revenues and a sheet for all of the expenditures. I tried to gather those together so it kind of made a clearer picture. You can see at the top the grant revenues and grant expenditures for this budget year. That's the first column. We were estimated to have a share of about $19,000, and we're projecting this year to have a share of about $24,000. You'll see that the amount we had budgeted and the amount that we're projecting is about double, and that's because when we were putting the budget together, we were estimating that part of the T-hanger project would occur this year, part of it would occur next year. All of it's going to occur this year, so that's why we're estimating that entire amount to be spent this year. The middle section shows operating and other revenues and how that compares to operating expenditures along with debt service. And so you can see that the net revenues or expenses, in this case of the airport fund, if we were able to get rid of our debt service, you'll see that the airport fund would be able to be sustainable on its own without a transfer from the general fund. That debt service is not going to be paid off until 2023, so that's kind of the bad news. We've got quite a while to go before the debt service does go away. However, you can see in next year's budget, we don't have a share on any grants that we're estimating at this time. That may change if a grant becomes available. But with the increased revenue, you can see that the expenses next year getting a little bit better. So the transfer from the general fund on the bottom line is decreasing next year, which is a good thing. Not much else to discuss about airport fund. If any of the commissioners have any specific questions about airport fund, I'll be happy to answer them. John can probably answer any questions you may have on airport as well.
John, with the larger plane that's actually been housed out at the airport, what's been the change in our monthly fuel revenues?
We really only sold one load to that aircraft, about 15,000. And I think we're going to do another one here since that Blue Jet gotten here. So it hasn't been a huge jump. When they first got here, we thought we were going to operate out of here until October. So far, they made one trip out and one trip back. I think there was some maintenance problem with it, but I was told by the gentleman who's working on it that it's supposed to fly out sometime this week, or this weekend, really. So, it'd be nice to have it coming and going.
Right.
Yeah, jet fuel is the one type of fuel that we have a better profit margin on than 100 low lead, so it's helpful when we're able to sell more jet fuel than expected. So next fund we'll discuss is the utility fund. That's water, sewer, wastewater treatment plant. On the revenue side, I haven't built in any rate increase into the budget yet. I wanted to get some input from the city commission on it. However, what I did build into the budget is a decrease of about 6% in water usage and 1% in sewer usage, because looking at fiscal year 2013-2014 actual to fiscal year 2014-15 projected, we saw about a 6.33% decrease in water usage and 0.6% in sewer usage. And since we didn't do a rate increase last year, it kind of gave me an accurate picture of, I believe more people are conserving water. I know some of you commissioners married, Ms. Brown was here when we did the rate study, which was really more kind of a restructuring of the rates. It had a rate study component done in conjunction with it, but what we did back at the beginning of fiscal year 2013, we changed the structure of our rates where the base water rate didn't include 4,000 gallons anymore. Our old rate, we had 4,000 gallons included whether you didn't use any water at all, or you used 1,000 gallons or 2,000 gallons, you were still charged a base rate that included 4,000. So, and any 1,000 gallons over the 4,000 was the same rate, whether it was 5,000, your fifth 5,000 gallons or 100,000 gallons. So we went to a rate where it was just a flat rate that didn't include any usage, and we've got 3 different tiers to water rates now. 0 to 4,000 gallons is a much lower rate. 4,000 to 12,000 is a slightly increased rate. 12,000 and above is a vastly increased rate. So, and that was required under several grants that we received, cost share agreements with the Water Management District. We agreed that we would implement a water conserving rate structure, a block rate structure, and so we did do that. And I think that a lot of our larger users, it's taken a while for management and a lot of these different companies, these larger companies, to realize that costs have gone way up on irrigating. And so they've cut back on that. So that's the reasoning why we saw such a large decrease in water usage and only slightly in sewer usage, because it's typically our irrigation users that we're seeing and conserving, because those irrigation bills get very large very quick. So other revenue sources, which are things like penalties, water and sewer taps, wastewater plant, septic dumping charges, remain unchanged from the current fiscal year we're in now. On the expenditure side, the water plant, no changes in staffing levels. There was a very slight decrease in operating expenditures, and the included capital outlay was $4,000 for replacement of a chemical feed pump, $4,000 for a well motor, $9,000 for the primary feed pump, and $40,000 for well cleaning and upgrades. And these capital outlay items are, they're not really like wish list type capital outlay items. These items are things that Melvin has to have in order to keep the plant running and for everything to continue going smoothly. So those are our capital outlay that we can't really go without. Wastewater treatment plant, Brian's budget, again, no changes in staffing levels, another slight decrease in operating expenditures, very slight. And capital outlay, I've changed that to include the $1.5 million for the BCR Clean B project, and we'll discuss that a little bit more here in a second. Recs department, water and sewer distribution.
Going back to wastewater.
Sure.
Are we going to proactively look for potential revenue opportunities with spray fields and reuse, additional reuse areas?
We can do that, but in order to, and Jonathan may have some more information on where exactly the reuse is at now, and that's something that we're going to need to take a look at, is what it will cost for us to get reuse to some of these other places that may use it, and to really implement a reuse rate structure. We did have a study done on the reuse rate structure, and I'm trying to remember what the net revenue would have been. It was very, very small, because we just don't really have a lot of people using it right now. You know, the college hooked up to it, and I think they really haven't been using it. We've only got a handful of other users.
Have we proactively sought people to use it, farmers, some of the larger fields?
Not that I'm aware of, unless, did Jonathan? I thought he was here. Is he out there? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, while they're looking for Jonathan, those are certainly things that we can definitely take a look at for this fiscal year coming. I think we can look at it, maybe do some research and some studies and see what might be out there that we might be able to take advantage of to see if we can implement some of those things moving forward.
But you ran right to, the college and other
Mhm.
places, and maybe some of those people who do the yard watering,
Mhm.
like, if the line's right there, if they can tap into it, it
Yeah.
might be a rate that you can give them that might make it.
If we can find some usage in some areas that can take some reclaimed water, then we can definitely look at it, adding and billing the, or coming up with some type of rate structure and possibly seeing what our benefit might be for that.
And Brian, how many gallons are you looking to get rid of on a daily basis?
We're 100% discharged for reclaim, and we're averaging around 1.4 million, 1.3 million gallons a day. The golf course uses 400,000 to 500,000. Everything over that we can get rid of.
And that's something that we may need to take a look at if we implement a reuse rate structure. Since it's kind of an inter-fund, the golf course fund should be paying for all of the water that they're using, and that's definitely not good for the golf course fund. So, but absolutely, that's something that we can look at. Hooking people up to it that are close to it now, if they already have an irrigation meter, they're probably paying more for that, so it may end up being a net decrease in revenue for us if we did, but Tara had a good idea of maybe extending that reuse if there's farmers or somebody else that could use it for some industrial type of use that could use a lot of it. The other problem we may run into is whether it rains or not. That can change the amount of water that Brian has available every day, and we would just have to look at how much water we could promise somebody every day without being able to meet our obligations on it. So.
I got one more question.
Mhm.
If we looked at, in the future, putting lines at the airport and our industrial parks, is any of that water going to the county's industrial park? So if somebody came in there, it would be something that they might use?
We have reuse at the airport because that's one of the spray fields for it. However, I don't know where the reuse line, if it's near the industrial park, it's not anywhere near the industrial park, is it?
It comes in right by the old CDR on the airport
backside.
property.
So it goes down Kaylarkin Drive?
Kaylarkin Drive and then on the airport property.
It's reasonably close to the.
Yeah, but if we ever do that part on the other side, it wouldn't be that far for us to run lines. In that corner where the guy was gonna do the windmill stuff, we thought at one time.
Yeah, it's not that far from there if it's at the old runway. So that may be potential. We've just got to hopefully find some businesses to come into the industrial park that may have a use for it. So next department is Rhett's department, water and sewer distribution. Again, no changes in staffing levels, slight decrease in operating expenditures. Capital outlay that's included in his budget, again, these are capital outlay items that are necessary for operations. $15,500 for meters and meter repair, $5,000 for sewer materials, and $71,000 for pipe and fittings. We typically always have $50,000 in the budget for pipe and fittings, and Rhett always uses that every year to restock the warehouse. This year, he included an additional $21,000 for 12 fire hydrants, so that we have those on hand so that we can replace some fire hydrants. So. The last department is utility administration. No changes in staffing levels. However, there was a decrease in operating expenditures of $41,000 due to the combined billing with the gas authority. And then I had to turn around and include a transfer of $24,500 to the gas authority to cover their increased costs for combined billing. So the net of that is the savings that, I brought up at the city commission meeting when we were discussing consolidation with gas authority. So the transfer to the general fund remains unchanged at $260,000.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
Is there, are you looking at giving two different bills? I mean, they could be on one sheet, but is it where people gonna have to pay the water and the gas bill at the same time, or they'll be able to do, one if they needed to? Some people don't have gas, they just got water. And some of the folks have called and asked, well, would I have to pay both of those bills one time, or if you got it figured out, or can they pay one?
If they don't have gas, they won't have a gas bill.
I know, but if they got gas and they got some
If
cook
they have
with it.
both and they want to pay just water and sewer and garbage,
Yeah.
or they just want to pay gas.
Yeah,
We've discussed it preliminarily, and, you know, that there should be, you know, policies in place, because we kind of do it here to come up with payment arrangements. If somebody, you know, can't pay all of it, we put them on a, you know, a payment schedule, payment arrangement where their water doesn't get cut off, and they're not, you know, paying the extra fees for all of that. So that's something, I haven't sat down with the gas authority since last city commission meeting when we discussed it. Been busy with fire assessment fee and this, so, but that's something that we're definitely going to discuss and hammer out the details on, so.
well, you kind of need to put that at the top of your list, because we've got some folks that they cook with it, or they heat with it, but they don't use it all of the time. And then they've got people that use it all of the time for cooking and they need water. And sometimes they,
Well, there'll be two different services, so if they've got certain months they use gas, they can turn gas on then, turn gas off in the months when they don't need it, like during the summer. So I know the gas authority has mentioned they've got a lot of people that do that now, so there's always
we want to
potential
make
for
sure that those people will be able to keep their water going if at the time they can't pay the gas bill, they can pay it another week or two, a month later.
This kind of shows the operating revenues and expenditures of the utility fund. Utility fund really doesn't have any, didn't have any grant projects, so I didn't have to create all of the different categories, but I just wanted to point out the net revenues or expenses of the water fund. This year we budgeted to use a little bit of reserves, and that would have dropped our reserves under 200,000 down to below 4.5% of operating expenditures. However, projected this year, you can see our operating expenditures are doing much better than projected, and I've got the detail on why that is right here in a second. So our reserves are about 375,000. That's about 9% of operating expenditures. That's still well below recommended minimum of 17%. And then next budget year, you'll see that as the budget currently stands, no extra capital outlay items in it, no staffing increases, no major changes. The water fund is already upside down. So discussing the reasons why projected is so much better than the budget this year, we put in this year's budget $75,000 to do a line replacement. That was something Mr. Simbor wanted to see in the budget. We kind of did a rough line replacement last year on Kate Street. Some of you may have remembered seeing the pictures where the fire hydrant and there's barely any water coming out of it, and they put a new line in. That was only, if you guys know where Kate Street is. Brett, how long was it? 400 feet? 500 feet?
6 something, I believe.
6 something. Was not very long at all, and it cost about $75 to do that one, if I remember correctly. So that's just something that we didn't do this year. And then we had some savings in Rhett's department, personnel, due to personnel changes. I think he had one person that was on active duty that contributed to the savings. Same thing in Brian's department. He's had some turnover out there, so the gaps in employment have created some savings. And Melvin had quite a bit of savings in operating expenditures. Melvin, I think part of your plant was down. You had some savings in chemicals and electricity and different things this year. So that's what contributed to projected being that much better than what we budgeted for. So, which is a good thing. But those kind of things they just kind of happen. It's kind of hard to plan for things like that. So I included this because I wanted to discuss the impact of the VCR project on the utility fund. Column on the far left is our actual current operating costs. It's about $73,000. You'll see that under disposal, we have no cost for disposal at the moment and no revenue coming in from leachate. That's because of that interlocal agreement that we've got with the county. We take their leachate, they take our solids at the landfill, and we call it even. Over on the far right-hand side, you would see that our current operating costs with disposal. I know, we've discussed, not taking leachate anymore at the wastewater treatment plant. So if we stopped taking leachate at the wastewater treatment plant and we had to start paying for disposal costs at the landfill, that's what those costs would be along with our current operating costs. That'd be an increase of about $138,000 over our current operating costs. The middle column shows our proposed operating costs with BCR, including that $75,000 loan repayment for the SRF loan to get that $1.5 million construction project done. You'll see that there's about $121,000 included in the operating cost for BCR whole biosolid solution, and that includes disposal. So under their proposal, if we went with their proposal, we'll see an increase of $127,000 in operating costs. But that means that we will no longer be sending our solids to the landfill. So the city could do one of two things: just completely stop taking leachate altogether, or we could look at possibly renegotiating that interlocal or coming to an agreement with the county, since they won't be taking our solids anymore, for them to pay some fee for the leachate. Now, if we did do that, this $270,000 in potential revenue, it comes from Brian. He based that on the amount of gallons of leachate that he took last year, Brian? Yep. And that being at 9 cents a gallon, I think it was. I think it was about 3 million gallons. So that's the potential revenue. Now, what we don't know, is just speculative, is would the county, be willing to do that? And if they do, how long could we rely on that revenue stream? What if 2 or 3 years down the road, the county decides to build their own treatment facility and we no longer have that revenue? So just something I wanted to make the commission aware of, and so I kind of built it into a table here to show the status quo without the BCR project, and then I built in just some various rate increases to show what the surplus of the deficit would be in the utility fund with various rate increases. So you can see in that first column, first row, status quo: we don't do the BCR project, we don't do a rate increase, we'll be spending almost $81,000 out of reserves. If we do the BCR project and we stop taking leachate and we don't have any additional revenue coming in and we don't do a rate increase, we'll have a deficit of about $208,000, which will pretty much eliminate all of the reserves we have in that fund. If we do the BCR project and hopefully bring in some revenue for the leachate, you can see what that would be in the third column. So I tried to give the city commission some information on just where the utility fund stands, and even looking at these, this is just the annual operating deficit. This is not taking into account the vast amount of infrastructure replacement and improvements that we need to do in the utility fund. Mr. Suggs and I were looking at some figures from last year on pipes that are older than 1950 in the city. It was estimated to cost about $9.5 million. That figure, I would guess, is probably higher than that. $10 million over 20 years. half $500,000 a year, loan payment, so, or more. So just something to keep in mind. Utility fund desperately needs to get its operating surplus to a level where we can start affording to replace the infrastructure that we really need to replace. So, any questions on utility fund, discussion, thoughts, feelings?
No, I wholeheartedly agree that we need to put in place a long-term plan to start replacing those lines. And we need to start yesterday. We got to get away from waiting until something breaks before we actually start being proactive, active in doing it. And so we've got to look at the health of the fund and figure out ways that we can generate back our revenue in order to get that done.
Unfortunately, leachate may be one of those opportunities. However, we haven't even, begun discussions with the county to see if they would be interested in doing something like that. So we can look at that next budget workshop and have some more information on that.
Yeah, that's a pretty serious thing though, Matt, but looking at the number of breaks, there was 26 breaks over the course of the year, and that service not going to how many of our customers we have. So that's a pretty serious impact, and just as we did with the water plant, I think we need to take that same approach with the utility group.
Yeah, looking back at reserves, 300,000 in reserves would not really go a long ways. I'm trying to remember what the reuse repair under St. John's 19 cost us. It was about 80, 85. Can't remember what it was, but
Somewhere right in there. 80 or 90.
and that was reuse. That wasn't drinking water that people are relying on. So it's reserves being in that level is very, very concerning for me. So.
Matt, if I could, just for point of clarification, what was the estimated miles of lines that you were talking about for the $9-point-something million repair?
Like 75,
It was-
75 miles or 100?
It was quite a few of them.
Between
and we just
75 and
heard that-
100 or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall. You don't happen to remember, do you, Rhett, for that amount of?
I want to guess it's like 100, I think,
Overall,
it
it's
120?
was like 111, I think.
A little over 100 miles, and probably about 65 miles of them are
Need to be replaced.
cast iron and need to be replaced.
And roughly 600 foot of it costs us $75,000 to replace. And we're looking at a fund balance here about $200-some thousand.
Yeah.
That's, Commissioners, that's the fight that we're up against. And so when Matt and I were going over the budget this week, looking at these numbers, that was quite scary to say the least. So we're going to have to take a hard look at that and see how we're going to be able to move forward with bringing our infrastructure up to speed.
Yeah.
And another concern is if we were to go out and have to bond this money, with our reserves being in the position that we're in right now, it's kind of scary what our rate might be or what our bond rate might be.
If that occurred and we had a major break that depleted revenues, or we had a major repair that we had to borrow any money on, and we may even be required to do it with this SRF loan that we're looking at for the wastewater treatment plant. They require certain coverages to be in those grant agreements. 1.2. And so when you look at your net revenues, what we've got right now, I mean, we're looking at some pretty hefty rate increases. Looking back in, was that 2012 when we looked at those, Brett, when Woody was still here? Was it 2011? When they kind of looked at what the total replacement cost of everything that needed to be replaced? I want to say it was like $28.5 million.
Yeah, it was 20-something. I think that was probably 2008, somewhere in there.
So that long ago, costs have definitely increased since then. So it's unfortunate, but it's something that needs serious consideration. The golf fund, revenues, the next table is information regarding golf-related revenues. I stripped out snack bar and restaurant-related revenues because when the budget was originally put together, we were thinking that there were only going to be 3 months that the snack bar was operated, so I tried to segregate those two so that we could just look at golf-related revenues. We budgeted this year about $675 in just golf-related revenues. I had Chris, Monty, and Andy put together projections, and this was data based on the first 6 months of the year. So April, May, June had not happened yet when they put together these figures, and they were estimating 624 for the year. I just went through last week and the week before and kind of looked through the end of June and tried to see how we've done in past years and tried to build in a little bit of a increase in those different revenue lines. I'm hoping that my calculation is wrong and we get 15 or 20,000 more dollars than that, but I don't know. Mr. Suggs and I looked at it the other day, and it was kind of concerning. And next year for golf-related revenues is 641. So that's going to be something that Mr. Suggs and I we're going to meet with Chris and Bobby and Andy and take a look at that and dig into it a little bit deeper. Expenditure-wise, course maintenance for next budget year, there was a requested increase in operating expenditures of $26,000, and that's in a variety of different expenditure lines, overseeding, chemicals and fertilizers, things like that. Also included was $37,000 for the regrassing of the remainder of the front 9 holes. That's not expected to occur in this current fiscal year. When we did the budget this year, they were hoping to close the front 9 like they closed the back 9 last year and regrass the entire front 9. When Chris Monty turned in their projected budget a month or 2 ago, he changed the plan a little bit to where they're doing some tee boxes and parts of the front 9 so that they don't have to close the entire front 9 because they were concerned about the level of play and how that would affect revenues. So they kind of tried to build it into 2 different years. So there's some cost in this year, and then there's cost next year. In the clubhouse, there was a decrease in non-snack bar related operating expenditures of $21,000. Again, that was in various different lines. Again, trying to put together a table to show the different sections of the golf course budget so that hopefully it's a little bit easier to understand instead of just looking at, pages full of numbers. The golf course, I think this is the first grant the golf course has ever gotten, so I included this section up here for grant revenues and expenditures, and that was for the USDA restaurant project. We were expecting the project to be 100% grant funded. You can see in the projected column that did not happen. We had about $14,168 last year, so that pulled from the 200, but we also had it in revenue last year. But you'll see that the total cost of that project was $40,000 more than what the grant would cover. So getting down into all of the operating expenditures, including snack bar, golf-related, everything like that, we budgeted to have to transfer about $103,000 this year from the general fund. Looking at projected right now, and this was using my numbers. Like I said, I hope that I'm wrong. But that increased the $40,000, the city share of the grant, along with the net expenses for the estimated for the year. That puts the transfer at about $266,000, not $103,000. So, looking at next year, as I mentioned before, Mr. Suggs and I, we're gonna sit down with Chris and Andy and Bobby and go through the budget. So those figures may change. Hopefully they'll get better. But that way down at the bottom, you can see that unlike the airport fund, the golf course fund, their debt is, there's a transfer coming in from Better Place to pay for that debt. So even when their debt goes away, these numbers here we're looking at for the transfer from the general fund, that's for the actual operations of the course. So it's definitely different than the airport fund.
And where we are with the restaurant, what's next, whatever you want to call that.
It's completed. It received, how many weeks ago was that? We had our visioning session? 3.
Yeah.
When we had our visiting session that night, they had just received the sign-off on permit that day for it. So it's been completed. However, our operator has pulled out. So we're going to have to look at, which may be a positive thing. Maybe we'll get a better deal from another operator. So looking on the bright side of things. So that's something that we're going to need to be looking at here sooner rather than later. Any questions on golf course? No questions? No. The reasons for the transfer being $162,000 higher, I wanted to include a little bit of information. That $40,000 for the USDA project, it was about $37.5 when I separated the snack bar revenues and expenses from the golf-related revenues and expenses. Under what we were estimating in the budget, if we had outsourced that, we would have done, quite a bit better by outsourcing it. And then that $117,000, that's pretty much all of the difference between what we budgeted and kind of what my projections were. Good thing is, they've been managing costs pretty well out there. They've got about $32,000 that they're below budget in course maintenance and clubhouse operating expenditure lines. So, but the net effect is it's $162,000 higher than what we originally budgeted for. Last enterprise fund, sanitation fund. This one's always try to leave on somewhat of a high note. Didn't build in any rate increases in the sanitation fund. Killing me, Ed. Didn't build in any rate increase in the sanitation fund. Expenditures under garage maintenance, no changes in the staffing levels. Had a small increase in personnel expenditures due to various longevity increases and a slight increase in overtime. Sanitation collection department, again, no changes in staffing levels. Approximately $18,000 higher in personnel costs due to an increase in overtime there as well, and some longevity increases. Operating expenditures going up a little bit as well. And we did include, just changed this number yesterday after Mr. Suggs talked to one of his contacts regarding rear loader sanitation trucks. And I had $200,000 a truck in there, and he said it's closer to $300,000 a truck. So I bumped it up to $575, but that's kind of a wash because I've got $575 in financing on the revenue side to cover that. So transfer from the general fund remains unchanged at $95,000. Sanitation fund revenues and expenditures, again, just tried to create a couple different categories so it's kind of easier to understand the budget. Operating revenues and other revenues, I broke out other revenues to show that what we originally budgeted for was to surplus a truck. I think we got $22,000 the last front loader we surplus, so I stuck that in there when we were doing the budget this year. But Ed is going to keep the front loader that he's taken out of commission when we get our new front loader in, how long, Ed? Month? Couple weeks?
Probably in the next couple of weeks.
So he's going to keep that one as a spare, because if one of the front loaders goes down, how much were we paying to Waste Pro when we had the rim truck?
One time we bought like $10,000.
Yeah, for a week, or a week and a
Yeah, a
half.
couple of weeks, yeah.
So those costs quickly climb when we have to outsource that. I also had in $25,000 for a CNG reimbursement from the state, so I left that under projected because we're getting the new CNG front loader, so we should get that from the state. Operating expenditures, you can see the difference between budget and projected. Kind of went over the differences just a minute ago. You can see that the net revenues of the sanitation fund are doing very well. Going into next budget year, you see some of the debt service for the front loader we got last year. Well, that was last year. The front loader we're getting this year is coming into play next budget year, so the net revenues are decreasing a little bit. Even with the two rear loaders we're going to get, the net revenues should be about even after we get those two rear loaders, and so we'll only have one more rear loader to replace. So we're trying to stagger the replacement of these trucks so that we can kind of get the sanitation fund in a good replacement cycle for the trucks, and to where hopefully we don't have to see, you know, large increases. If we can get them on a steady schedule, you know, we won't have to see a dollar per household increase in sanitation rates, or 10% or whatever it may be. So the next category kind of shows the debt proceeds. We had originally planned to buy the front loader this year with money from reserves, but in further discussions as we got into the budget year, just didn't feel comfortable. We wanted to try to keep our reserves up. This is the one fund that we've actually got pretty good reserves in, and if, you know, the city gets in real trouble, the commission could do an interfund loan resolution to lend some of that to another fund, but of course it has to be a loan resolution. So as you can see, reserves are doing very well in sanitation fund. So any questions or comments on that? Last but not least, the general fund preview. I guess I'm not reading it. I know. The general fund, as we've discussed in the past, there's so many different categories in the general fund. I just went ahead and just put in the operating deficit of the general fund. We budgeted this year to use about $285,000 of reserves. That was going to drop our reserves down to almost $500,000, which is just below 6% of operating expenditures. Again, that is well below the recommended minimum of 17. A lot of cities in Florida, that recommended minimum of 17 is for something that the national GFOA has established, and so that's for cities that are not cities in Florida. What you typically see in cities in Florida is 25–30% of reserves. So projected this year, at this point in time, it looks like we're going to do quite a bit better than what we budgeted for, even with that huge increase in the transfer to golf. And I've got some changes listed after this to kind of show why. So reserves, hopefully not quite as bad, around 8%, still too low. And then looking at what all of the departments have requested so far for next year, there's a pretty big hole in the budget right now. I've started doing some adjustments to different departments to take out things that have been requested. And I think the last time I looked, it was around 300, but Mr. Suggs and I are really, over the next 2 weeks, that's going to be our concentration, is to sit down with all of the department heads and go through their budget line by line, look at, you know, requested personnel, any personnel changes that may have been requested, and to come back 2 weeks from now and start off with general fund, and then we'll show any changes that have occurred to any of the enterprise funds. So more complete review of the general fund is expected to be presented at the next budget workshop. Some major departmental differences between budget years, and that's just between this figure here and the requested budget. You can see police department's has cut quite a bit out of their budget already. But some of these other departments, I think facilities have about 45,000 in capital outlay, but I can't remember what that's for at the moment. You can see some of these other departments, some huge increases. Parks and Rec, we all know that that's a category that the City Commission really wants to concentrate on. So Jonathan put a lot more into that budget, but again, that contributed, significantly to that operating deficit that we're looking at so far. Transfers are up slightly, even though the airport transfer is decreasing. The golf transfer we had in there for now is higher than the 103, so that resulted in a net increase. Then our contingency, we typically try to have $100,000 in the general fund so that pass an operationally balanced general fund budget with a contingency in it, so that in the event of an emergency or something like that occurring in the general fund, we can still end the year with an operationally balanced budget and not have to cut anything we were planning to do in the process. So this year we had used about 50,000 of that contingency already, so it took another 50 over what the current budget is now to get that back to 100. So that's all I have. Does the commission have any comments, input on what they would like to see us concentrate on in general fund coming up in 2 weeks?
How many prison crews do we have anticipated?
2 right now. One is being paid out of the Parks and Rec Department, I believe, or is it Streets? Can't remember. You paying for one of those, Ed? I can't remember. Yeah. Yeah. Ed's paying for one in Streets, and then the other is in Better Place. So that's something Mr. Suggs and I have already discussed, is hopefully being able to get a couple more prison crews, but have city employees operate those prison crews, because the $58,000 cost for the prison crew is actually for the guard. So if we can operate a crew ourselves, I believe that it's at no cost. I wasn't here when we ran one without a prison guard, so I couldn't answer that.
Yeah, the goal is to get some assistance with some of these daily labor things that we need to do, our mowing, our right-of-ways in our streets, and hopefully some work in our cemeteries and also in our parks, if at all possible. For the commission's update, I've got a scheduled call into the warden out at the institution, Putnam Correctional Institution, trying to schedule a meeting for next week to see what we might be able to do. This was a huge advantage to us over in the city of Keystone Heights, where we were able to offset about $150,000 to $175,000 a year in salary costs by utilizing this work crew. So we're going to look at that and see what we might be able to do here, and what advantages that the Putnam Correctional Institution might be able to assist the city of Palatka with.
Now that would go a long ways to help with the mowing and maintenance of right-of-ways throughout the city. Not just right-of-ways, but our property in general. So.
Well, that's the plan, and we'll see how it shakes out. We're going, like I said, I got a call into the warden's office and see if we can't get that moving forward.
Are we advertising for a restaurant for the golf course? So, when are we gonna start putting the RFP?
Jonathan's still calling. He would probably be able to answer that question. I haven't heard of any discussions about it yet, but Mr. Suggs just started last Thursday, so.
Yeah, we can get some of that information. Ms. Brown will get back to you certainly between now and the 23rd, but certainly bring information back on the 23rd.
There hasn't been a new advertisement for the restaurant
No,
at this point, because it's fairly new since they sent the letter in. We heard of the communication a little prior to the letter coming in, but there hasn't been any advertisement or at least an RFP to go out for a new restaurant. In looking at it, again, I agree with Matt, it may be an opportunity for us to actually capitalize on some things that we missed in the first proposal that was there. And it's also something that we can look at and consider as an opportunity to kind of create an incubation type situation where we may be able to put a new business in there. Or, you know, or an aspiring entrepreneur or something. But it's something that we can definitely look at by the time we get back.
So that wraps up everything I had for the budget workshop. Commission has any comments? Or
In the recreation budget, did he have anything in there for program? What do you have? How much did he have in there for programs?
I haven't had a chance to look at the detail. I just looked at the bottom departmental total as a whole. I haven't gone through and dissected exactly where the 216 is going. I don't know whether that's more personnel, more plans for programs. So I can't answer that at this moment.
Rufus, when we go to our conference, they have a grants program, and they used to give it to us in a book that I could read, but now they got it with all that technical stuff, and they do have all recreation grants and a bunch of stuff. I would ask you to take a little time and visit so you can bring back to us where we can get information on all these grants. They have them listed in categories, and it'll be a good way to find out how it works and help us get to pull out the stuff that we need. They look at national grants and state grants, I think. And they did have some stuff for outdoor recreation at one time. And juvenile justice and that kind of thing had recreation to it. So we need to look at that grants information.
We just spent a little time today looking at a FERDAP grant. So we spent some time this morning meeting on that with the city manager and Jonathan.
And then you need to call Nick and Congresswoman Brown's office, and you tell them what we might be looking for, if there's anything that they can have pulled up for us, and then they get it to us, and then they kind of help push us to do it.
I shared with Matt earlier today, based on some conversation